The state banquet was supposed to be a night of polished smiles, glittering protocol, and royal unity. But in one silent instant, Princess Catherine saw the brooch on Camilla's gown, and the entire room changed. It was Diana's brooch, not similar, not symbolic. The very piece Catherine believed should never have been worn without meaning, permission, or respect. And then Catherine did the unthinkable. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine did not blink. She did not turn away. For a few seconds, the princess sat perfectly still, as if her whole body had understood the shock before her voice could carry it. Across the table, Camilla felt the stare land on her, sharp and unmistakable, and the queen consort's fingers moved toward the brooch, almost by instinct. William noticed the movement first. The prince looked from his wife to the jewel, and something inside him hardened. This was not a simple ornament. This was memory pinned to silk. This was grief placed in public view. The banquet mattered because it was not a normal dinner. A state banquet is a formal royal meal held for important guests from another country, meant to show friendship, power, and national dignity. Charles had wanted this evening to look calm. The king needed unity after weeks of private strain, and he needed the room to believe the family still moved as one. Catherine knew that too. She understood the cost of breaking the rhythm of royal ceremony. But she also understood what silence would cost. If she said nothing, Diana's name would once again be swallowed by protocol. William slowly reached for Catherine's hand beneath the table, not to stop her, but to steady her. She felt his touch and pulled back gently. That tiny movement told him everything. The princess was not acting from temper. She was acting from pain. Camilla looked down, then up again, and her face changed because she knew Catherine had recognized the brooch instantly. Charles saw it as well. The monarch's expression tightened, and for the first time that evening, his careful control began to crack. The room kept breathing, but barely. Catherine rose from her chair and the quiet became dangerous. Servers paused. Guests looked toward the head table. William stood half a second later, close enough to show support, far enough to let her speak for herself. Then the princess gave the order that no one expected. She asked for the service to stop. Camilla froze. Charles looked from Catherine to the queen consort, and the king understood the damage was already done. This was no small breach of etiquette. This was Diana's shadow returning through the one symbol no one had the right to use carelessly. And before the room could understand why Catherine had stopped everything, the people closest to Diana's legacy began revealing exactly what was at stake. In that room, the brooch did not mean the same thing to everyone. To Camilla, it was a symbol of royal acceptance. To Charles, it was a dangerous reminder of a past he had never fully escaped. To William, it was his mother's shadow returning at the worst possible moment. And to Catherine, it was a line crossed in public under chandeliers before the world. Catherine held herself still, but the pain had already reached her face. She had spent years honoring Diana's memory with care, never turning it into a weapon, never using it for attention, never allowing grief to become a performance. That was why the moment hurt so deeply. Diana was not just a name from the past. She was William's mother, the woman whose absence still shaped his silence, his caution, and the way he protected his family. William saw the brooch, and his jaw tightened. The prince had always guarded anything connected to Diana with quiet intensity, especially pieces that carried public meaning. To him, royal jewelry was never only decoration. A brooch in palace language could become a message. And this one carried a wound. A royal state event, a formal gathering where the family represents the country before guests and diplomats, was meant to show unity. But this single object had turned unity into something painful. Camilla tried to keep her composure. She lifted her chin, held her posture, and acted as if nothing had changed. But her hand betrayed her. The queen consort touched the brooch once, then quickly lowered her fingers, as if she had suddenly realized that every eye near the table had followed the movement. She had wanted acceptance. She had wanted the jewel to say that old pain had been healed. Instead, it said something colder. It said that someone else's grief had been borrowed without consent. Charles shifted in his seat, and the king's discomfort became impossible to miss. He knew the brooch was tied to private conversations that had already divided the family behind closed doors. He also knew Catherine was not the kind of woman who challenged ceremony without cause. The monarch looked toward William, then toward Camilla, and his face carried the burden of a past returning at the exact moment he needed control. Catherine felt sadness first, then shock, then something stronger. She looked at William and understood he had seen exactly what she had seen. The prince did not need to speak. His silence was full of hurt, and his hurt gave her the courage to remain standing inside a room that expected her to sit down and smile. Sophie noticed the change before others understood it. The trusted confidant leaned gently toward Catherine, her voice low, controlled, and heavy with warning. She whispered that this was not the first time the brooch had caused alarm. Catherine did not answer, but her eyes changed. William saw it. Charles saw it. Camilla felt it. That whisper pulled the story backward to the hidden moment that made Catherine's reaction inevitable. This did not begin at the banquet table. It began weeks earlier inside a private family ceremony where Diana's personal pieces were reviewed for a future memorial tribute. Catherine had asked for one thing only, that the brooch remain untouched until William decided its place. But during that quiet ceremony, Camilla made a request that turned a private memory into a royal fault line. Catherine remembered the day with painful clarity. The gathering at Kensington had been small, quiet, and guarded from outside noise. A memorial tribute, a planned public act meant to honor someone's life and legacy, was being discussed for Diana, and every detail carried emotional weight. William had entered that meeting already tense because anything connected to his mother was never just history to him. It was childhood. It was loss. It was the wound behind the royal smile. Sophie had sat close to Catherine, watching every movement with the careful calm of someone who understood the family's hidden pressure. The trusted confidant knew the brooch was not simply part of a royal collection. A royal collection means personal and official pieces kept by the family, often used for ceremony, memory, and public meaning. When the sealed velvet case was placed before them, Catherine looked at William first. The prince did not touch it. He only stared, and his silence told everyone in the room that the piece still hurt. Camilla had not been present for the first part of that ceremony, but her name entered the room soon after. According to a documented account later shared in a private palace briefing, she asked Charles whether she could wear Diana's brooch at the coming state banquet as a gesture of unity. The queen consort believed the jewel could show that old divisions had finally settled, but Catherine saw the request differently. To her, unity could not be made by taking another woman's pain and pinning it proudly before the world. William spoke to Charles that same evening. The prince told the king the brooch should remain unworn until he personally decided its place in Diana's legacy. Charles listened, but he did not promise. That silence wounded Catherine more than a refusal. She understood palace hesitation. She understood careful words, but this was different. The monarch knew the object was sensitive, and still he left the door open. Catherine learned of Camilla's request through Sophie, who repeated the details from the recorded conversation kept by a senior aide. The princess felt disturbed, not because Camilla wanted dignity, but because the queen consort seemed ready to borrow it from Diana. William left the discussion visibly shaken, and Catherine watched him carry the pain without complaint. That was why the banquet became unbearable. When Catherine saw the brooch on Camilla's gown, she knew the private warning had been ignored. Charles had stayed silent. The queen consort had gone forward. William had been forced to face his mother's memory in public. So when Catherine rose from her chair, it was not impulse guiding her. It was the memory of a promise broken. The room did not erupt. It froze. Catherine did not shout. She did not tremble. She simply looked across the table at Camilla and asked one question that cut through every title, every rank, every practiced smile. "Why are you wearing it?" The words were quiet, but they landed like a verdict. In that instant, the banquet became a family reckoning. Catherine remained standing while the service stopped around her. A state banquet in plain terms is one of the monarchy's most formal dinners held to honor important foreign guests and show the strength of the crown. That was why her decision carried such force. She was not interrupting a private meal. She was halting a carefully staged symbol of national dignity, and everyone in that room felt the danger of it. Camilla tried to answer with royal calm. She lifted her chin, looked toward Catherine, and began speaking as if the brooch was only part of her evening dress. But her voice tightened halfway through the sentence. The queen consort knew. The guests did not understand the full meaning of the jewel. Yet the people who mattered did. Catherine knew. William knew. Charles knew. And that made her composure feel thin, almost fragile. William rose slowly beside Catherine. The prince did not speak over his wife, and he did not try to soften her words. He simply stood close enough for the room to understand that she was not alone. His face carried the pain he rarely allowed anyone to see. This was his mother's memory being handled in public, and he could not pretend it was just an unfortunate choice. Diana's name was not said aloud, but it filled the silence between them. Charles leaned toward Camilla and told her quietly to remove it. The king did not raise his voice, but the command still cut through the table. Camilla hesitated. Just one breath, one pause. Yet that pause changed everything. Catherine saw it, and her grief sharpened into disbelief. William saw it, and his jaw locked. The monarch saw it too, and his face darkened because hesitation now looked like defiance. Catherine wanted dignity. She also wanted truth. That was the battle inside her. Part of her wanted to step back, sit down, and protect the evening from scandal. Another part knew that silence would turn Diana's pain into decoration. So, she held Camilla's gaze and refused to move. Camilla finally reached for the brooch, but the damage had already spread through the room. The queen consort's hand shook slightly, and the tiny movement said more than any apology could have said. She was exposed before guests who had come to see royal unity, not a wound reopening in real time. Anne stepped toward Charles with a face carved in cold certainty. The Princess Royal did not comfort him. She warned him. This was no longer about jewelry, she said in a low voice. This was about judgment. And once Anne named the real problem, the palace stopped treating the banquet as an incident and began treating it as a crisis of authority. Behind Catherine's quiet stand was something the palace could not ignore: moral authority. She had no crown yet, no throne, no final signature over royal protocol. But in that room, Catherine held something stronger than procedure. She held the emotional trust of William, the memory of Diana, and the public image of a future monarchy that could not survive appearing cruel. Charles understood the shift before anyone had to say it. The king still held the crown, and the crown means the legal and public authority to lead the monarchy. But authority inside a family can move before any title changes. That night, power did not sit only with the monarch. It stood with Catherine because she had defended a memory the country still carried, and William stood with her because he knew silence would have looked like betrayal. Catherine sat in a side room afterward, hands folded, face calm, heart still burning. She refused to soften what she had said. The princess knew the palace would worry about appearances, guests, headlines, and protocol. Protocol simply means the strict rules of royal behavior at official events. But to Catherine, the deeper rule was human. Diana's legacy could not be treated like a styling choice. It could not be borrowed for comfort. It could not be used to make old pain look healed. William stood near the closed door, choosing every word before facing Charles. The prince did not accuse his father wildly. He spoke with restraint, but the hurt beneath his voice was unmistakable. He told the king that Catherine had protected the family, not embarrassed it. She had stopped one painful moment from becoming a permanent insult. Charles listened, and for once, the monarch had no easy answer. Anne stepped in with colder clarity. The Princess Royal supported Catherine without drama, warning Charles that symbols can wound more deeply than statements. A public speech can be corrected, a palace note can be rewritten, but a symbol once seen lives inside people's minds. Anne knew this family had survived scandal before, yet she also knew Diana's memory remained different. It was not only royal history, it was national grief. Camilla's team tried to contain the damage quickly. They framed the brooch as reconciliation, a gesture meant to show peace between past and present. But Sophie cut through that explanation with quiet force. The trusted confidant reminded them that reconciliation cannot be forced on the grieving. If William had not agreed, if Catherine had not accepted it, then the gesture was not unity. It was pressure dressed as grace. Charles looked down at the notes placed before him, then pushed them away. The king knew a palace asset review, a check of who accessed royal items and who approved their use, could expose more than anyone wanted. Still, he ordered it. Every piece linked to Diana had to be traced. Every approval had to be named. That order changed the mood instantly, because now the question was no longer why Camilla wore the brooch, it was who allowed it to happen. By midnight, the palace corridors were no longer quiet with ceremony. They were quiet with fear. Aides moved without speaking. Doors closed softly. The banquet had resumed in appearance only, but everyone knew the real event had already ended. Camilla had removed the brooch. Catherine had not returned to her original seat, and Charles was facing a truth he could no longer delay. Charles gave the private order with a voice that left no room for argument. Diana's personal jewelry archive had to be reviewed before any future use. A jewelry archive, in simple words, is the guarded record and storage of royal pieces, showing where they are kept, who may access them, and when they can be worn. The king knew this mattered because Diana's pieces were not ordinary palace items. They carried grief, public memory, and William's deepest family wound. Catherine sat away from the main table, feeling no victory at all. The princess had stopped the banquet, but stopping it had also dragged Diana's memory into a place of whispers, panic, and damage control. She had wanted respect, not spectacle. She had wanted the brooch protected, not turned into the center of a royal crisis. William stayed close to her, and the prince understood that her strength was costing her more than anyone could see. Camilla sat alone after the door closed behind her. The queen consort stared at the empty place on her gown, where the brooch had been pinned, and that blank space felt louder than the jewel itself. She had wanted the piece to speak of acceptance. Instead, it had spoken of hurt. She had wanted to appear secure. Instead, the night had left her exposed, questioned, and painfully aware that some symbols refused to obey the person wearing them. Palace staff prepared a controlled explanation for guests, but no careful sentence could erase the moment at the table. A controlled explanation means a short official reason shaped to calm people without revealing the full conflict. Charles knew such words might protect the evening, but they could not protect the family from itself. The king took the access file, read the approval chain, then set it down without speaking. William saw the same file soon after, and his expression changed. The prince had expected one private request, one poor decision, one mistake made under pressure. Instead, he learned the brooch had passed through more hands than he had imagined. That made the whole thing feel less accidental. It felt planned. It felt permitted. And that realization cut deeper. Catherine looked toward the closed door and made her own decision. The princess did not ask for another briefing. She did not ask for more palace language, more excuses, or more protection from the truth. She asked to speak to Camilla privately, without aides, without guards, without anyone turning pain into procedure. William heard the request and went still. Charles heard it and looked older than he had all evening. Camilla heard it and lowered her eyes. And in that private meeting, the night finally stopped being about protocol and became painfully human. There were no aides in the room, no prepared lines, no royal masks strong enough to hide what the banquet had exposed. Catherine and Camilla faced each other, not as future queen and queen consort, but as two women standing in the long shadow of Diana. For the first time that night, anger gave way to something more dangerous: honesty. Catherine stepped into the private sitting room with her face calm, but her heart still heavy. A private sitting room, in simple words, is a smaller royal room used for personal talks, away from formal guests and public ceremony. That mattered because this was the first place all night where rank could not protect anyone. Camilla could not hide behind the banquet. Catherine could not hide behind silence. The pain had followed them both inside. William waited outside the door, refusing to interfere, yet unable to leave. The prince knew this conversation belonged to Catherine, but he also knew the brooch belonged to a wound that had shaped his entire life. Charles stayed back as well. The king understood that if he entered, the moment would become about authority again, and this was no longer something authority could fix. This had to be human, or it would mean nothing. Catherine looked at Camilla and spoke with quiet sadness. She told the queen consort the brooch did not belong in a performance of unity because Diana's memory still carried living pain. The princess did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Every word was sharper because it came without anger. She explained that unity cannot be forced by wearing something tied to another woman's suffering. It has to be earned gently with respect. Camilla tried to defend herself at first. She said she had wanted the peace to signal acceptance to show that the past no longer had to divide the family. But even as the queen consort said it, her voice weakened. Catherine listened, then answered with the truth that broke through the room. Acceptance cannot be taken from someone else's grief. It cannot be pinned on a gown and presented as peace. Camilla lowered her eyes. The defensiveness faded, and shame took its place. She reached for the case holding the brooch, opened it slowly, and removed the jewel as if it had grown heavier in her hands. Then the queen consort placed it on the table between them and said she would not wear it again. Catherine did not smile. She only nodded because the promise could not erase the wound, but it could stop the wound from being repeated. Camilla understood that now. The princess understood it too. William entered moments later and saw the brooch resting on the table. The prince did not ask what had been said. He did not need to. Catherine's face told him the battle had changed. Camilla's silence told him the same. And in that quiet, the night reached its turning point. But outside palace walls, the private meaning of that gesture was already becoming a public storm. By morning, the monarchy's private wound had become a national obsession. The image was everywhere. Camilla seated in diamonds, Catherine standing beside the banquet table, William watching with a face carved in restraint. No official explanation could compete with what people believed they had seen. Diana's memory had entered the room again, and Britain reacted as if an old heartbreak had been reopened. Catherine became the name on everyone's lips before breakfast. A major newspaper carried the close banquet image under one brutal headline: "The brooch that stopped the palace." A newspaper front page in plain terms is the first page people see before they read anything else. And this one mattered because it turned a private royal clash into a national judgment. Catherine was not shown as reckless. She was shown as protective. People saw a woman standing up for Diana when the room expected silence. William understood the danger immediately. The prince knew public sympathy could be powerful, but it could also reopen wounds the family had spent years trying to control. Outside Kensington Palace, a small crowd gathered with white flowers and left them near the gates as a quiet tribute. Kensington mattered because it was tied so closely to Diana's life, and the flowers made the story feel less like gossip and more like grief. Returning to the street, Camilla faced the storm with visible strain. The Queen Consort appeared subdued when leaving a private chapel service later that day, and the cameras caught the heaviness in her expression. She had wanted acceptance. Instead, the public saw disrespect. She had wanted unity. Instead, the country began asking why Diana's memory had been placed on her gown without the clear blessing of William or Catherine. Charles moved quickly, but even the king could not slow the emotional force of the reaction. He approved a palace statement confirming new restrictions on the handling of Diana-linked personal items. A palace statement is an official message released to shape public understanding. But this one carried a deeper meaning. It showed that the monarchy knew a line had been crossed. It also showed that Catherine's stand had forced action. A broadcaster framed the entire scandal with one line that spread everywhere. This was not a jewelry mistake. It was a memory mistake. That sentence cut through every careful explanation. It gave people the words for what they already felt. Diana was not just history. She was still a living part of Britain's emotional memory, and Catherine had defended that memory in the moment it seemed most exposed. Camilla heard the reaction and withdrew further into silence. Catherine heard it and did not celebrate. William heard it and understood the future had shifted again. The public had not turned away from the monarchy. It had looked straight at the crown and demanded respect for the woman it never forgot. And when the noise finally settled, one truth remained inside the palace, sharper than any official statement. The banquet ended, but its meaning did not fade. It became the night Catherine proved that loyalty to the crown does not mean silence. It means knowing when dignity has been crossed. Camilla lost the right to treat Diana's memory as a symbol of convenience. Charles learned that old wounds cannot be managed by protocol, and William saw Catherine become the guardian of something deeper than tradition. Catherine made her final decision by morning, and it was not revenge. The princess did not ask for Camilla to be humiliated again. She did not demand a public punishment or another painful scene. She asked for one clear boundary. Diana's most personal pieces would never again be used without family agreement. A private protocol, in simple words, is an internal royal rule that controls how sensitive matters are handled behind palace doors. This one mattered because it placed grief above image and respect above convenience. William supported the boundary without hesitation. The prince saw it as protection for his mother's memory, but also as preparation for the future monarchy. He knew the crown could not ask people to trust it while treating pain like decoration. He knew Catherine had done what many feared to do. She had stopped a royal event not to destroy the family, but to save the part of it that still had a conscience. Charles signed off on the new restriction with a heavy silence. The king understood that the brooch had exposed something larger than one mistake. It had shown how easily palace control could fail when human feeling was ignored. He had tried for years to manage old wounds through careful timing, careful words, and careful ceremony, but Diana's memory had never obeyed palace management. It lived in William. It lived in Catherine's protection of him. It lived in the public heart. Camilla accepted the restriction without protest. The queen consort understood that the brooch had cost her more than one evening's dignity. It had reminded her that acceptance cannot be demanded and peace cannot be worn like jewelry. She had wanted the symbol to close an old chapter. Instead, it had proved the chapter was still tender, still guarded, still capable of shaking the room. Anne found Catherine later and spoke with blunt kindness. The Princess Royal told her that what she did was not defiance. It was stewardship. Stewardship means protecting something valuable for the future. And Catherine had protected memory, grief, and royal trust. In one impossible moment, the princess heard those words and finally felt peace. Not because the pain had vanished, but because she had refused to let it be ignored. The monarchy survived the banquet because Catherine stopped it. That was the final truth. She did not weaken the crown. She reminded it what dignity means. The future would not be built by erasing the past. And Diana's memory would not be used to decorate anyone else's need for acceptance. No further mystery remained, only the lasting image of Catherine standing when everyone else stayed seated and changing the meaning of royal duty forever. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next.